Lecture 4.2 Spirituality and Art. When talking about Greek deities, my mind goes to the visualization of apex architecture and large, passionate, reaching statues of Greek gods. Many of these figures are known as the cultural foundation icons for the Western world. Sculpture takes on a very important role in our early belief system. Even as we are bombarded with images in contemporary society through social media and television screens, we stop. I mean, we notice what is obstructing our view and what is invading our space, no matter how large or small. The three dimensionalities of sculpture make one stop. Notice because it shares an obvious space with the living. We learn through looking at ancient Greek sculptures of scenes at the West Pediment in the Temple of Zeus in Olympia, Greece. The scene is of a Lapith wedding, during which the Lapith king gets drunk with the centaurs that come from the mountains to join the wedding guests. Because centaurs are barbarians and drunk barbarians at the wedding. Chaos and trouble ensues, and the centaurs attempt to take the new Lapith bride and other women at the wedding. The artist places a sculpture of the calming and poetic god Apollo in the middle to mediate the chaos. The characteristics of a centurion is that they are half animal and half human, barbarians from the mountains around Olympia. The centaurs represent chaos, violence, and barbaric behavior. We see this as the artist chooses to represent this through arches of their backs and extending positions. The extended position of expression. Looking at the large statue of the Greek god Apollo, he is made to represent the idealized, refined, and somewhat cold Greek citizen. Did half human and half horse people live on the earth? Would the origin of where the horse comes from add a hint as to who the centurions represented to the Greeks? Or is this description a general statement about all foreigners approaching ancient Greek citizens? So we see judgment, ego, humility, and social standards and boundaries and preferential treatment of the gods, all in this scene of what happens when centurions get drunk at a wedding in Olympia. In Germany, there exist great bronze doors that have 16 panels that depict the Old Testament and the New Testament. The 16 panels are created from sculptural reliefs and casted in bronze. In the reliefs, we are seeing the power of religious suggestions and suggested boundaries that make foundations for different religions or philosophies, yet this one being Christianity. The work is supposed to lead the viewer into a discussion of the unknown and provoke question of one's foundation, while pondering the beginning and end of life and its individual purpose. At the same time, the detail of the work implies that the artwork itself embodies the right way as told to the artist by God. What is the way? The work is clearly the passion of the artist. That conveys spirituality to the viewer, yet the work relays a special and direct communication to the viewer that represents the passion of a higher power other than the artist that made the works. The visual and physical creation aids in oral history and somehow stabilizes the belief system as a witness. This becomes an accepted channeling of spiritual information from God to the artist. Often the viewer looks at the works created as undisputed works that demonstrate the evidence of a God and the visual narration of the religious story. Could spirituality inspired works of art be seen as a voice of God, the passion of God's will? Let's explore this with the sculptural reliefs found in Hildesheim, Germany, at the Abbey Church of St. Michael's, in the form of sculptural doors made of bronze and were commissioned by Bishop Bernward in the year 1015. Bishop Bernward directed the abbey. The Hildesheim doors in Germany that identify scenes from the Old Testament and New Testament. The panels total in 16 panels. Each panel was created as a sculptural relief and bronzed and then made into large doors. The doors are entitled The Genesis of Life. The panel reliefs on the doors highlight the different scenes of the Old Testament, starting off with the Paradise Lost and the New Testament ending with the Annunciations. Looking at the correlation of Genesis in the Tree of Life in the third row and left-hand side of panels on the great doors of Hildesheim, the panel depicts the story of Genesis and the introduction of the Tree of Knowledge. Adam and Eve unfold with the curiosity of the Garden of Eden and the bitter consequences of Eve taking fruit from the tree of knowledge gets them expelled from the Garden of Eden to know the world of suffering and death. On the right side of the third row, opposite of the tree of knowledge, is the panel that depicts Christ crucified to the cross. The panel is entitled The Tree of Life. To Christian parishioners, the Tree of Life offers eternal life, and believers who ask for forgiveness of their sins also accept Christ as their Savior. The figures on both panels that represent Adam and Eve and Christ on the cross were created with fragility, vulnerability in mind. So the artist chose to elongate the figures and put them on in a non-naturalistic setting to reflect the inner spiritual world and not the exterior physical world. On the Hildesheim door, there are visuals of damnation and redemption, and the panels represent both again, Old and New Testament. Let's look at the stela made of sandstone that depicts the life of Buddha, Gupta period, circa 475 in Calcutta, India. Siddhartha Gautama lived in Nepal and northern India in the years 563 to 483 BCE. Siddhartha, also known as Buddha, who was born into a wealthy family. This foundation period of the Buddha's life is located at the ground level of the stela. The ground level of this cycle of the Buddha's birth, we see a baby coming from Buddha's mother's right side. The stance and position of Buddha's mother, which is also the only female in this cycle on the stela, is likened to the only female in the panel of the temptation in the Garden of Eden of the Hildesheim bronze door. Eve and the mother of Buddha are standing in a similar way. This may allude a possible Buddhist stela inspiration on the artist while creating the Hildesheim bronze doors. Each level of the stela depicts another evolving cycle of Siddhartha and the evolution of the Buddha. The second level of the stela is enlightened men of the Buddha, and we see the now Buddha touch the earth while sitting in the lotus position of acceptance and reflection, harmony and enlightenment. In the second cycle, a Buddhist position is of rebirth and renewal. All the levels from birth to nirvana are formed as if under the Bodhi tree, which is a tree of knowledge and tree of life. So far, Spiritual artworks from Greece and Germany and India are works of art from artists who are unknown or unmentioned by name in the text. Are they revered as somehow unimportant to the final product? Or is their work glorified by the light of God and passion and the devout by leaving a visual impression of a narrative that satisfies the unknown, and the artist is considered highly evolved spiritually and a servant of God? So they stay humble, so there is no need for them to have their name remembered? What do you think? As we enter a new reading of spiritual being, we contemplate that a spiritual being is connected to ancestor devotion and the essence of life after death. We know from the last chapter that the artist is creating visual narration to create memory staples in the belief system of the parishioner or devotee, according to an oral history of divine inspiration. The names of the artists were not mentioned in text in the previous readings of this chapter. This could be key in the reading spiritual beings. Why? Because the artist is being portrayed as a humble servant of God who channels the spiritual works of art through oral history and visions. In this section, we are shown a Senufo, mother and child figure, late 19th century wood, 25 inches high. The statue has an elongated breast and face, and other limbs were smaller. The Senufo spiritual belief system is centered around the creator, deity, nature, spirits, and ancestral spirits, which include a female ancestral spirit called Ancient Mother. The spiritual art in the sinful culture and society are customary objects infused with a spiritual presence. This object can be used to heal or harm. The objects that depict Ancient Mother are represented as human, but the breast and belly, chin, and baby are elongated, exaggerated, and other parts are short. The Sinufo belief that spirits attached to Ancient Mother objects are to help guide the devotee through the generational age, rites, rituals, historical tradition, social customs, and religious practices. The Sinufo belief system allows the people to see the spiritual artist that can create the Ancient Mother statue that goes on to have a spirit fused to it through ceremony and secret traditions, and hold the artist people of high regard. The Navajo of New Mexico also believe in passing ancient rituals down through generation to generation. Within the Navajo community, there exists the spiritual art of sand painting. Although sand painting is a temporary work of art, it is constructed as a form of prayer or ceremony. The sand painting is by a shaman created using elements in nature: corn, sand, charcoal, pollen, powdered stones. The subject matter comes from cosmology of Navajo creations, and this includes logs, holy plants, animals, and deities. Each of these symbolize a type of healing and spiritual cleansing. After the sand painting images have been created, a special ceremony takes place over the course of days and weeks. A special shaman or medicine man, rarely women, oversee the ceremony and place the person who is to be healed in the center of the painting as their ancestors used the medicinal suggestions from the visual prayer formed by the sand painting to heal the person as they lay on the painting. The combination of cosmology of the Navajo and their ancestors' devotion, as well as the combination of nature and spirituality, creates an expression of a powerful force and out of human control. Further, in connecting with the gods, the importance of communicating with the gods is a subject for art In many cultures, who is the medium, the middle person, God's liaison? In Christianity, saints involve and anointed humans through death to help the living through prayer and connection and devotion to God. Spiritual art on this subject educates the viewer on spiritual practice. Emphasis of divine interactions with God by earthly rulers suggests the ruler has a divine connection with God and will be seen by the masses as the truth. This was the story of the stela of Naram Sin, an Akkadian king who ruled Mesopotamia, now part of the modern Iraq, around 2254 and 2218. Naram Sin was a religious leader as well as a military leader. His stela celebrates the Akkadian victory over the Lullaby people. Lower level of the stela depicts the battle has taken place in the mountains. Above all stands Naram Sin. Naram Sin's figure is larger than the rest of the figures in the stela. In fact, Naram Sin is closer to the sun. Not only does Naram Sin want to impress upon his people that he is a fierce battle leader, but he also wants them to accept and follow him because he is God's liaison or supreme being. Humans were viewed as imperfect beings then and now, and during this Akkadian king's rule, the people were offered more assistance from higher beings. To keep the gods happy, prayers and ritual sacrifices were performed. These stelas were created for viewers to remember and educate and document supernatural beings like Naram Sin. Icons are seen everywhere in spiritual art through the ages. During the Middle Ages of the Christian Orthodox Church, small portable religious images of holy figures called icons were used. The portable icons were available for their parishioners to practice devotion and serve as reminders and sources of inspiration. Icons were known to be able to communicate with God and create miracles to the devoted. Icons were painted on small pieces of wood and were portable. Many were attached to chapel screens, and other portable icons were carried from the Byzantine Christian Orthodox Church to places like Russia, where it served to spread Christian beliefs. Now, icon art followed a grid line on how to create the religious figures, so the artist had to follow a mandated style of the Orthodox Church. The religious icons had to have family resemblances to other icons. They all had gold backgrounds and linear outlines, and they had stylized poses, but the poses had to be believable or naturalistic to qualify as religious icons who had supernatural a supernatural connection. The grid seems to make creating the religious icon more of a pre-thought out piece of art for sure. So, is the process of creating these pieces spiritual? It can be. The humility and egoless artist that has intentions to serve God and the Christian Orthodox Church in the Middle Ages could make this a spiritual experience. The religious figures also had to be recognized by anyone that knew Christianity, or the iconic figures like the Madonna and Child would always be required to have a halo above their heads. This way, other Christians would recognize the Madonna and Child as holy figures because of the heavenly halos that surround their heads. The Gateway to Art textbook shows the viewer an image of Virgin of Vladimir, created in the 12th century before 1132, tempura on panel. This work portrays Blessed Virgin Mary as the Virgin of loving kindness, and it presents her with her face touching the baby Jesus to emphasize her loving virtue. This icon was said to have been created in the city of Constantinople, and it was intended to bless and protect the city of which it was housed. The original icon is in Moscow and has been continuously since the year 1935. The original faces of the icon are still intact, but the other parts of the painting have been damaged from people touching it and has been repainted in areas. It is here we begin to hear the artist's name. Gian Lorenzo Bernini created the ecstasy of Saint Teresa in 1647 to 1652. The statue is made of polychromed marble, gilt bronze, yellow glass, fresco, and stucco. The figures are 4 feet 11 inches high. Rome, Italy is where they are housed. This is a new day in the times of spiritual art, and the artist is revered as an educated craftsman that has done an apprentice with skilled sculptures of Italy. These artists belong to guilds. At this time, there is a new respect for what would be called masterpiece or capolavoro, or the use of maestro, because of the sought after high reputation from the guilds for great work. As with the Gothic architecture of the stained glass created for God's light to stream into the church, Bernini inspired devotion and passion with his work of the ecstasy of St. Teresa. The statue was created for a funerary chapel for the Cornaro family in the church of Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome, Italy. The sculpture is a massive 11 feet high in total and depicts St. Teresa of Avila and her mystical visions as she is about to be pierced by an angel's arrow to infuse her being with divine love. The sculpture is dramatic and emphasizes the supernatural with dramatic lighting and gilt bronze ways depicting God's heavenly rays coming from the clouds as angels hover over St. Teresa of Avila. The ecstasy of St. Teresa is created out of marble to show the complexity of smooth skin against the gauzy feel of material to the thick wool nun's habit the saint wore. This sculpture exemplifies her divine and the gracefulness of religion as gestures that glorify God. This emotional and dramatic and passionate sculpture represented at the time the Catholic Church new focus on believers establishing a strong and personal relationship with Christ. In Bernini's sculpture, Christ's passion is relived through the Saint Teresa's devotion to Christ, but also her piety that resembles the dramatic ecstasy of being infused with divine love from arrows of angels. This serves as an example to follow to the parishioner. In the readings of judgment and the afterlife, we go to the drawings found in the book of the Dead's Last Judgment before Osiris, circa 1275 BCE, painted papyrus. The scene shows the judgment of the living before they are allowed to go into the afterlife. Many artworks depict the last judgment before humans enter the unknown or the afterlife as a way to remind the living they will have to answer for the wrongdoings or sins they did while alive after death. In the book of the dead that belonged to Hunefer, an ancient scribe who lived over 3,000 years ago, states that a successful journey into the afterlife required proof of an honorable life, and that proper respect has been given to the gods. The papyrus painting of the Last Judgment before Osiris shows Hunefer being escorted by Anubis, jackal-headed god associated with the afterlife, to the scales where the souls will be weighed. Also present is the judgment before Osiris is Amit, the eater of the dead, who anxiously awaits the results of the weighing of the souls. There are levels that one must go through, and other souls are waiting in the depicted Last Judgment before Osiris. Amit is seen with a crocodile head and a mane, and 4/4 of him are lion, and his hind quarter is hippopotamus. Amit decided that Hunefer's soul, in the form of a heart, is lighter than an ostrich feather it was weighed against. Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sun, presents Hunefer to Osiris, god of goodness, vegetation, and death. The depiction of Osiris is that he is seated at his throne. The Book of the Dead was placed in Hunefer's coffin at his time of death, with hopes the scriptures would be followed and lead Hunefer to a successful afterlife. Another artistic depiction of scenes that show the level a soul will have to go through before they are determined successful in death is the lintel. Created in 12th century Europe, this important piece created by Gislebertus is a depiction of the fate of the blessed and the damned side by side. The sculptural relief is divided by levels or planes of existence during the Last Judgment. There is a lower level below the main panel that shows several figures representing souls that are waiting judgment in death. In the main panel, we see a large representation of Christ, who is larger than the other figures because it represents his importance and his key role in judgment of mankind. On the right side of Christ, there are souls of the blessed, along with God's angels that depict the blessed souls go on to live in heaven for eternity. The figures are smooth skinned and elegant and at peace. On the left side of Christ is where the scales of the souls of the damned are weighed. The figures of the damned have ravaged bodies, and they appear horrid and grotesque. The body of work was created to send a message of consequences to Christians living in sin about judgment in the afterlife. The panel offers a glimpse of heaven as peaceful and respectable, and an afterlife in hell as grotesque and horrid. The effects of living a spiritual life as an artist lends the narration in the paintings of Dutch painter Johannes Vermeer, 1132 to 1675, who includes religion in his work in subtle pictorial gestures in the background of his painting, A Woman Holding a Balance. Vermeer follows a popular dialogue by artists of his day by painting scenes of the ordinary day in a life, in which he includes religion. A woman is standing by a window going through a jewelry box. We see this as she holds a tiny balance in her hand. There is also a painting in the background that sits in shadow and shows the Last Judgment. The background shows Christ is in the sky and many souls below him waiting to be judged. According to Gateways to Art text, this shows the viewer that life is short and to live a decent and honest life. We also must consider the light coming from the window and the crowning of the woman's head and face, highlighting light against a dark background, further using the woman as an example of a good Christian walking and living in the light of God. We now go into sacred places. For this example of sacred places, Gateway's text takes us to La Chaux Caves in Dordogne, France. The caves in La Chaux are prehistoric and have cave drawings that are still strong and vivid today. These caves are places that humans will travel and visit again and again because they are sacred to our existence. These caves were mere caves. It is what it is inside that makes them so special. The documentation of nature drawn by humans, the documentation of spirituality. In these natural resources take on a new dimension. The walls of La Chaux caves in southern France were painted with depictions of animals between 17,000 BCE. There was effort by cave artists to adorn the cave walls with images of animals. There are magnificent paintings located in the Hall of Bulls, which is the main cave. The Hall of Bulls measures 66 feet wide and 16 feet high. The hall houses paintings of animals and bulls. One painting is of a bull 15 feet long. The details are realistic, and there are numerous paintings of numerous bulls. Since the artist of the cave drawings had no written language, we are to assume the paintings of the bulls and animals meant more than decoration. The images were meant to tell a story or teach about hunting practices and spiritual practices, using some of the images to represent shamanic practices. There are cave paintings also found in Spain, which tell us that this was a cultural practice to message and dialogue through the pictorial. From France, we go to the catacombs of Rome, Italy. The catacombs of Rome were constructed between the 2nd and 4th centuries CE. The construction is an underground system of tunnels measuring 60 and 90 miles in length and containing the ancient remains of 4 million people. The catacombs were for Romans that held different religious beliefs and visit their ancestors' burial places. Pagan Romans practiced both cremation and burial for their dead. For Jews and Christians, burial was very important. The catacombs housed temples of worship as well as religious observances and a space for Christians to gather as well as hiding places for fugitives. While the caves of La Chaux in France are covered with paintings of animals, the catacombs have frescoes in different areas that adorn both places used for burial and rooms in which people would gather. All Romans of all three faiths, of pagan, Jewish, and Christian, all saw the same imagery. The content of the fresco meant different things to different religions. A fresco depicting a banquet scene or a shepherd with his flock would be interpreted differently and in accordance with the viewer's religion or staples in the religions. There is a fresco with a central figure named Priscilla in the catacombs. Priscilla is painted standing in a prayer position. Pagan paintings have a common figure as well, but to Christians, they identify with understanding that the figure is praying to their God. Being familiar with positions of prayer or certain animals or positions of the people in the painting spoke directly to people of the three religions, but meant more directly to one group depending on what was happening in the fresco. The fresco serves multi purposes: one, to win potential converts, and the other, to send a message to existing believers. The artists who painted the frescoes in the catacombs are unknown, yet they mean so much to humanity. Thinking of all the many man made rooms off the underground catacombs makes me think of the many mucarnes, which are decorative elements originally used to cover the tombs of holy men and can be seen inside the main entrance to Masjid Isha, also known as the Mosque of the Imam in Isfahan, present-day Iran. Now a mosque is a building where Muslims go to pray to Allah. The mosque can be the larger structure in a city, so it may also house a section used for a hospital or used for a school or play a significant role in the community. The mosque, Masjid Isha, has four vaulted entrances or iwans between the courtyard and the mosque interior. There are large towers, also known as minarets, that rise above the city and call citizens to prayer. Pointed arches are a staple characteristic of Islamic architecture, and they crown places within the mosque like special prayer niches called the mihrab and the iwan and decorative walkways. The mosque is equipped with a large pool for cleansing before prayer in the central courtyard. Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day, and it must be facing the direction of the city of Mecca. There are mihrabs placed on the wall in the correct direction of the city of Mecca for worshippers' prayers. The walls of the mosque are decorated in blue tile that have intricate designs on them and calligraphic text and foliage designs that are common in Muslim architecture. The intricate geometric pattern of the honeycomb vaulted designs are known as murkarnas, which are also made to symbolize the rotating domes of heaven. Marking a site as sacred is also a common practice in the long-standing Japanese religion practice of the Shinto. Shinto is closely akin to nature and the ways the sun and mountains correlate with the sky or water. The natural elements are connected to the well-being of humankind, according to Shinto devotees. The Shinto is unlike Christianity or Muslim religions. The religion is based on nature, mindfulness, and the present moment as it holds nature as a deity. At one time, mountains and other natural spaces and elements were worshipped because of the effect nature has on the cycle of life and crops and nutrients and peace of well-being of the human form. In time, shrines have been built for parishioners to worship a god named Kami. Kami was important to one area, but the shrines being built for the god extended throughout the Shinto religion, and today, apex wooden shrines are built and now including wooden gates and fences around them. The Isujingu shrine is one of the thousands of shrines throughout Japan dedicated to the sun goddess Amaterasu Amkiami. The residents visit the shrine and seek her assistance in their lives. The site is now a simple A-frame design wooden building made with natural materials. The Shinto parishioners believe that nature is cyclical, so the shrine must also be renewed and refreshed, and since 690 CE, Isujingu has been rebuilt every 20 years. A special ceremony ensues for the revitalization of the building, and meals are shared with the kami god, which infuse the everyday act of eating with a ritual significance to nature and ancestors. The readings of the Rothko Chapel wraps up the ending of the artist as the humble unknown servant of God and church, or spiritual places. In this reading, we see that artist Mark Rothko creates his own sacred place and space of worship or prayer. The Mark Rothko Chapel is in Texas and is built in an octagonal shape and embraces the art of Mark Rothko in his artistic intentions as a painter of the mid 20th century abstract expressionist movement. Rothko revered his work as intense emotion using non representational images. There is a spiritual reason why one would choose an octagonal shape for a place of worship that is linked to a spiritual belief that spiritual buildings built in octagonal shape represent rebirth and resurrection. Finally, an artist is not only adorning the church, but implementing their own spiritual philosophy within the walls of the spiritual and sacred space. Rothko worked close to architects to develop a space that had his exact requirements of placing his paintings and presenting the space and paintings in low lighting. Rothko wanted to show his paintings in group form on the walls to create an environment that transported the viewer beyond the everyday experience of stillness and into the presence of God.